Welcome to the program. My guest is David Swanson. David is a celebrated author and peace activist. His website is davidswanson.org. Welcome back to the program, sir. It's always good to see you.
Good to be here.
So, Donald Trump,
Yeah.
Your gut reactions about what's happening in this country and his upcoming inauguration.
Well, you know, I've been thinking this country was on the verge of disaster for many years, and I thought that we had a choice of two disastrous candidates. One of them was going to win, so I wasn't hit with deep depression on Election Day. I've sort of been there for years. But I think he's an illegitimate president in the sense that he did not win the popular vote. He fought against counting paper ballots where they existed. He and Republicans in numerous states stripped numerous voters, disproportionately minority voters, off the rolls. People were barred from voting if they didn't have proper IDs. The election machine counts are far from credible. He threatened intimidation at the polls. The whole system is bought and paid for by corrupt money. The corporate media that's now almost turned against him gave him $2 to $3 billion worth of free airtime, gave him the White House.
If we see this kind of stuff in the third world or in some authoritarian regime, our government gets out and, you know, everybody pounds their chest and says, this is horrible, this is an authoritarian regime, this is not democracy, and yet here it is at home and all the powers that be are looking the other way.
Not just that, but the U.S. government goes in and subvertly and overtly campaigns for the election of chosen candidates and organizes military coups and overthrows governments by massive military operation, and that's all okay if it's the U.S. doing it. But the Democrats, who found the one candidate who could lose to this clown, are finding the one argument that will blow up in their faces. They're not going after Donald Trump for anything I just mentioned. You know, everything I just said is, you know, completely verboten. They're going after him for being too friendly with Russia. You know, you have progressive columnists declaring that too much friendship with Russia is literally an impeachable offense. Here's a guy coming in unconstitutionally violating the so-called emoluments clause, domestic and foreign business relations that are absolutely corrupt and unconstitutional, and no attempt, not even the attempt of Rex Tillerson, the guy from ExxonMobil for Secretary of State, to give himself any separation from those conflicts of interest. And what do they want to do? They want to put out CIA claims about Russian influence on the U.S. election with zero evidence. And so you now have liberals, capital D Democrats, declaring that the whole world will fall apart if you don't believe the CIA on faith. And you have Fox News bringing on Julian Assange and these types to, you know, and so everything flips. Nothing. There's no adherence to principle or policy position by anybody. It's all party. You know, and when the Democratic Party says Trump and Putin are connected, you know, then whoever's for anti-fascism, pro-human rights, pro-women's rights, all these good liberal positions, has to also be for World War III with Russia.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
I'm reminded, David, of that last scene from Orwell's 1984, when, you know, he's getting the speech from the powers that be, that it's not about ideas, it's not about principles, it's not about beliefs, it is about power. It is and always will be about power, and that's why 2 + 2 = 5. It can be whatever we say it is, and we really seem to have found ourselves, and we've been here before, but here we are in our own lifetimes in this moment where 2 + 2 = 5, where we're being asked to believe the unbelievable, where we're being asked to believe stuff that we know isn't true.
Yeah, and people are sort of openly arguing that, you know, if they dislike Trump, that's an argument in favor of Russia having hacked the election and the Democrats' emails and given them to WikiLeaks and so forth. It's just sort of a personal preference. Forget facts. You've got people, the same people who will say on climate change, you must look at the facts, you must be empirical, you must be a scientist, I'm pro-science. You know, when it comes to Russia, it's a completely different crowd that says you must look at the facts. There's almost no overlap between the two.
Yeah.
And
whether the facts are there or not, clearly the Democrats are playing the Russia boogeyman card very heavily,
Yes.
and doing their best to establish some kind of relationship between Donald Trump and Putin.
And not just the Democrats, but the deep state, the CIA, the permanent spying bureaucracy that's feeding them this information. The United States has just moved more troops and equipment into Poland and Eastern Europe than seen since World War II. The United States facilitated a violent coup in Ukraine. The United States has put a missile base in Romania, is building one in Poland. Russia has been openly screaming, "Why are you threatening war on us?" for years now. We've had unverifiable claims about an airplane shot down in Ukraine. We've had a secession vote, yes, with Russian troops in Crimea, but a secession vote by the people of Crimea depicted in the U.S. media as a violent seizing of territory by a Russian invasion. You know, all of this playing out, threatening wars, but war between the two nuclear nations, each of which could destroy all life on Earth many times over.
Yeah.
And you got this corrupt, fascist buffoon, openly corrupt, moving in the White House. And what do people want to go after him for? For being insufficiently willing to build up hostility with Russia. I mean, it seems crazy to me.
So, what can you do, David? What do citizens do besides moving to Toronto? I mean, what do American citizens do? Those who think like you do, those who believe that this isn't good, this doesn't bode well for not only the American brand and America's place in the world, but things like journalism and democracy and public education. And that we see all of this on the chopping block.
Yeah.
What do we do?
I think we oppose.
And I'm sure you get that question all the time.
Well, I don't say move to Toronto. I have friends who've done it, and they still stay involved by phone and internet, and I respect them. But don't do that. If the good people leave, what are we going to be left with?
Yeah.
But get involved and get active at the local level here in Charlottesville, in Virginia, and globally with activists around the globe. Even Trump, even his government will respond to public pressure. This is why we're demanding that Obama or Feinstein or somebody have the decency to release that 7,000-page torture report. It's not because I think Trump will read a 7,000-page document. It's because if the public were forced to reckon with the fact that torture is not just illegal and immoral and generating enemies, but counterproductive on its own terms, it would be harder for the CIA to create movies like Zero Dark 30 and for us to have shows like 24 on our televisions and for people to believe that torture could do something. And that would make it harder for Trump to come in and say, I'm going to torture more people.
Right. And for those who don't know, David, what's this report? For those who've just now hearing about it.
Well, 4 years ago, the Senate so-called Intelligence Committee under Senator Dianne Feinstein from California, a Democrat, produced this 7,000-page report. We've seen a 500-page summary with numerous portions whited out that Feinstein describes as an overwhelming case that torture is ineffective, that it's never produced any useful information. Of course, we know it's produced false information by purpose, information like Iraq has ties to al-Qaeda and so forth that was desired by the torturers. But accurate information, no. And Feinstein says it should be made public right now. Obama says, no, I'm going to make sure it is preserved and it can be made public in 12 years or maybe later. And Feinstein, who as a senator has the power to introduce anything into the congressional record, thereby making it public with no consequences to herself, is deferring to the president because Congress just defers to presidents.
It's a team sport.
She says make it public, but not if the head of my party says no, then I'll just whine about it, but I won't do anything about it.
What's your read on the legacy of President Obama? He's getting ready to go out of office. You've been a peace activist, a liberal activist for many years, but no fan of President Obama.
I think we should give him a chance. I think his presidency has many minutes left in it, and we should keep open minds. And he might do something good. Yeah, no, he's been an absolute disaster. An absolute disaster. This is someone who has bombed 8 nations and bragged about it, who has created a new form of warfare called drone warfare, who has legalized by presidential decree and by forbidding prosecutions and otherwise practices of indefinite imprisonment without charge, of warrantless spying, just yesterday or today gave the NSA new position to give its raw data to all other agencies in the government.
He's gone after whistleblowers stronger and more aggressively than any president in our history.
By some measures, yes. More prosecutions under the Espionage Act than all previous presidents combined. This is a guy who came in promising the most transparent administration in history and who's created programs to pressure government employees to squeal on each other and ruined the lives of numerous whistleblowers who he promised to reward 8 years ago when he was campaigning.
But we were told in 2008 by the Republicans he's the most liberal senator that's ever been in the U.S. Senate. This guy is, you know, from way far out on the left fringe.
Yeah,
but that's not true at all.
No, he isn't. He stepped into office and went along with bailing out the bankers, bailing out Wall Street and big industry, forcing people into foreclosure, did almost nothing for working people. His promises to labor, like the Employee Free Choice Act, you were forbidden even to mention within a year of him moving into office. He, you know, sent labor unions like AFSCME at his instruction to hold rallies in places like Charlottesville where they told people, you cannot be here if you have a sign that says single payer on it, and we will not allow any speakers on stage who have ever advocated for single payer. I mean, this was a guy who pushed things in the wrong direction. And yes, he could have done many things worse. He could have done many things better. You know, he often went along with the warmongers voluntarily. Other times he was badgered into it. Yeah. I think when he and Russia were talking about a ceasefire together, and there was this danger months back now of peace breaking out in Syria, and the U.S. military went, apparently against his will, went ahead and bombed and killed a bunch of Syrian soldiers trying to scuttle, you know, the danger of peace in Syria. You know, that wasn't him, but he didn't say anything. You know, and when the generals were publicly demanding how many troops he escalate in Afghanistan, and he was publicly negotiating with them rather than dismissing them, you know, that plays in. When 8 former CIA heads publicly told him, don't you prosecute anybody for torture, and he said, oh, okay. You know, this feeds into this power structure that is now dictating to Donald Trump before he even gets in office.
I want to take a real quick break here, but before we do, Hillary Clinton. You did not support her candidacy. What is it about Hillary Clinton, and what do you say to all those people out there who say, oh no, you just don't understand her, David. She would have been a wonderful president, and she cares for the poor and the middle class, and she was going to change America.
Yeah, that's why I say give Obama a chance. He has a couple days left. But Hillary Clinton has a record of decades of working against single-payer health care, against working people for every war she could get her hands on, who took millions of dollars from foreign nations and from U.S. companies, for example, Saudi Arabia and Boeing, and then made it her mission to waive all legal barriers to get Boeing airplanes sold to Saudi Arabia that are now slaughtering families in Yemen. I mean, you can't get more corrupt, and people understood that. And she had a challenger in Bernie Sanders, who by every poll was clearly a far stronger contender. I mean, politically, not just morally, against Trump. And her party, with her collaboration, slanted the table against him, took nasty steps to deprive him of a fair shot at the nomination. And when that story was reconfirmed by additional information with emails that somebody gave to WikiLeaks, what did she do? Did the Democratic Party say, oh, we're sorry, we'll do better next time? No, they said, Russia did it. Russia gave WikiLeaks those emails. Forget what's in them. It is your patriotic duty not to read them. And there hasn't been a single major news story about what was in them since. It's all been about who gave them to WikiLeaks, with zero evidence of who gave them to WikiLeaks.
Yeah. So the takeaway about the Democratic Party, before we go to a break, is what?
May it rest in peace. Don't resuscitate. Unplug those tubes. Let it go. And don't make it a basis for your activism. Be an independent activist and make the same demands of Democrats, Republicans, or otherwise from a principled policy position, and we will be stronger, and a stronger party will follow.
We're talking with David Swanson. It's davidswanson.org. A very quick break. Stay with me. We'll be right back. Welcome back. My guest is David Swanson. He is an author and peace activist based here in Charlottesville, Virginia. David, we have seen in the Trump candidacy, in his term as president-elect, and very likely to see during his administration, a real aggressive assault on the institutions that are created to support democracy. A free press, journalism, education, a government, a freely elected government, and even labor, the interests of labor, the working class, the middle class. And of course, we've seen this for decades. It formed the basis of the modern conservative movement beginning in the 1950s. This assault on education, on government, on labor, on journalism. These are the bad guys in our society. So what's your read on that? Because when you start assaulting the institutions that support democracy, that you are literally by definition in an authoritarian regime. You're in some kind of dictatorship. You don't live in a democracy. And if you dismantle and I know this is a long question, I'm sorry. If you dismantle the faith that people have, that citizens have and should have in these institutions, what are we left with?
I mean, we've reached a certain comical point, tragic comical, when you have a nominee for Secretary of Education who opposes education, a nominee for labor who opposes labor, a nominee for housing and urban development who opposes housing and urban development, and so on. But this has been decades in the coming. This has been essentially, for my lifetime, worsening and worsening with each administration, apart from partisan differences. A lot of it is self-inflicted. When they put out this latest report on the so-called Russian hacking, and half of it is denouncing Russia for having a television network that Americans watch. I mean, first of all, very few Americans watch RT, but those who do, and they denounce it for reporting on Occupy, reporting on fracking, showing third-party candidates, and so forth. Well, if the U.S. media were doing those things, if it had a wide range of viewpoints and honest, credible reporting, why in the world would anybody be running off to watch RT, right? If you have a New York Times article about that report, it starts out with how damning it is, and like 12 paragraphs later admits there's not a shred of evidence in it. If that wasn't U.S. media, if U.S. media was valuable to people, why would anybody run off in search of something else? And why would it be possible to put out, completely baseless claims that get denounced as fake news and have people believe them based on their preference for what's true? But and a lot of this right now is coming from the left and the right. And when the Washington Post pushes a list of dozens of news outlets and denounces them all as Russian propaganda outlets, a dozen of which I've written for without getting a dime from Russia. I wish there were payments involved in it. It tears down the credibility. And then Russia hacked the electric grid in Vermont. Oh no, it didn't. There's just based on purely making it up. Right? I mean, no evidence, no journalism, no reporting. If that wasn't what so-called mainstream U.S. journalism has degraded itself into, nobody would be looking for alternatives. But this is what's happening to institutions. They're being degraded, defunded, privatized, militarized, corporatized. And so those who want to see them fall down are able to criticize them. And in many cases, that criticism is richly deserved. That doesn't mean we shouldn't try to save those institutions and rebuild them in a better way.
What is your perspective on the way forward for journalism, for news gathering, for those who are, like myself, who are very truly interested in things like the truth and facts, and see their responsibility as sharing facts, sharing truths with those who want to take the time to tune in and read and listen and watch. It's an opportunity to say, this is the truth. Well, you have people at Breitbart who say, well, no, this is the truth. And they just define it differently.
I think we need people doing their own journalism, by which I mean when the New York Times and the Washington Post and the right-wing blogs and the left-wing blogs write their stories about the latest report from the CIA, those stories are about the same length as the report itself. Just go read the report. right? You don't need somebody's spin. You know, the original source evidence is almost always available on your laptop now. Go straight to the source. And if you want to read what the New York Times says about it in case there's some wisdom added, fine. You know, but you shouldn't waste your time on secondary sources when the original is usually available now.
It's interesting that consuming the media of your choice as a tool in playing that team sport game of politics, it's so much about team. Yeah. It's go team. It's rah rah rah. It really does seem that truth and facts and those things that are supposed to guide a citizen in a free democracy, that they've taken a back seat to just cheering for your team.
Yeah, and you have to actively resist that, because it's not just your choice to read things that are pleasing to your mind and don't disturb your beliefs, but Facebook will impose that on you. Google will impose that on you. Your computer will send you the things that it thinks you already want to read. And so you have to go out of your way to follow sources of news.
And that's the really scary thing. If you look at if you see an algorithm for what it is, a kind of artificial intelligence, and that this artificial intelligence is deciding for you what to put in front of you, and that you have to fight through that to get at what you want. And it's just putting it in front of you. Well, you've read this before, here you go. It's just trying to keep you docile and where you are, and don't think too much about any of this. And all of that, of course, serves the powers that be. It serves a certain status quo that exists, and I count me among those who think that's frightening.
Well, you know, the silver lining in putting a Republican and a really rude and misogynistic and racist, barbaric face on this government is that we may have people getting active, you know, online and in the streets in a way that we haven't had for 8 years. You know, and
that is a silver lining. And we may see, I've had others in journalism tell me, we may be entering an era that is one of the new golden ages of journalism, because you know, it's now or never when it comes to journalism. You either do your job and embrace facts and share those facts with the public, or throw your hands up.
But you gotta, you know, it's gonna depend on the courage of whistleblowers who are not likely to have a much easier time under Trump than under Obama, under whom they've had the worst time ever.
Could get much worse.
And there's gonna be a need for real courage. You know, I think Julian Assange offering today, I'll come stand trial in the United States if you free Chelsea Manning. Now, he may know there's little to no chance of that, but that's the example that needs to be set.
Should Chelsea Manning, remind people who Chelsea Manning is, and should she be in prison?
Absolutely not. President Obama campaigned on rewarding whistleblowers. Here is a whistleblower, formerly Bradley Manning, now Chelsea Manning, doing decades in prison, having attempted suicide a number of times there, advocates suggesting if she's not freed, she will not live, who gave WikiLeaks what made WikiLeaks. All those State Department cables, the video of the helicopter murders in Iraq that came to be known as collateral murder, all of those emails, all of that information on what the U.S. State Department and military were doing that the U.S. public had no idea. And because it wasn't totally partisan or against a particular individual, people sort of generally embraced it as, wow, this is great to find out what our government is doing.
Transparency, imagine that.
Right, except the Army was not happy. President Obama wasn't happy.
Hillary Clinton wasn't happy,
absolutely not. And President Obama announced that Manning was guilty before she was put on trial, which is not something you do when your subordinates are going to try her. But if he's going to give anybody their freedom among these, you know, better known whistleblowers, it's going to be Chelsea Manning, not Edward Snowden, not Jeffrey Sterling, because she was tortured at the Marine base in Virginia, at Quantico. She was kept naked in her cell and so forth, and she's served years in prison already. So he doesn't have to pardon her. He can just commute her sentence to time served, say this has been harsh enough, she's near death, let's let her out. And he said the other day, according to NBC News, that she's on his short list and he would be deciding. Now that may mean nothing or it may mean something, but we've all been trying to flood him with emails and tweeting at POTUS and so forth saying, free her.
So much for the transparent government.
You know? You make it transparent, you go to prison.
Right. So let's try to end on some kind of positive note here going forward. And earlier in the conversation, David, you mentioned that people need to get involved locally. And, you know, I'm a firm believer, I agree with you on that, and I'm a firm believer that if there are any changes that are going to come to America regarding power and democracy and journalism, it must absolutely begin and take hold locally and then work its way up.
I think so.
And you know, it's not about just going to a city council meeting. It's about running for office. It's about people getting involved. And being heard on all these issues.
Yeah, and I think we need a resurgence of people in Charlottesville getting in the streets, doing rallies, doing teach-ins. I'm disappointed in the Blue Ribbon Commission that didn't advocate for any peace monument. We got war monuments all over Charlottesville. We haven't brought any resolutions to the city council lately opposing wars, opposing, you know, with the city of Charlottesville could commit and set a model for others. We aren't going to support torture. We are going to prosecute it if it comes into our jurisdiction. Anybody from Charlottesville is involved. We're going to prosecute it. We don't want a war with Russia. We don't want a war with Iran. We don't want, you know, the cities need to speak up because Charlottesville has a record of doing this, influencing others.
Yeah. And you'd like to see more of that around the country. And for those who say, well, you know, cities, that's got nothing to do with Charlottesville's commenting on that. Your response? Because you hear that a lot when they pass a resolution about something and somebody will say, just stick to your business. That's not your business.
Well, this guy named Jefferson, who wrote the rule manual now used by the U.S. Senate, which says in it that this is a role for cities to petition the national government as well as state governments, and courts have ruled that this is part of their function, and I consider it part of the function of anybody representing me, to represent me to higher powers that I can't reach because I don't have the money to buy them, you know? You watch Congress grilling all these nominees on their conflicts of interest, but nobody suggests that Congress members shouldn't have conflicts of interest. They're all bought and paid for.
That never
and the
comes
city
up.
Council members aren't, at least not to that degree.
Yeah. David, thank you for being here.
Yeah.
Thank you for the work you do. DavidSwanson.org, that's the website. You can order the books, listen to the podcasts, and read his articles and interviews there as well. You can find the complete archive of this program online at mediaandcitizenship.org. Have a terrific week, and y'all be good to each other.